My name is Rose Kelsey. On this day that should have marked the beginning of my life as David Harper's wife, I found myself walking toward an entirely different destiny. The morning of my wedding to David Harper, Princess Vivian suffered a terrible riding accident. Without hesitation, David removed his ceremonial robes and hastily sent word to me. "We must postpone the ceremony. Our marriage is a small matter compared to the princess's well-being." This wasn't the first time he had chosen her over me, but unlike all those previous occasions, I didn't weep, didn't plead, didn't bend to accommodate his wishes. When my attending maid asked whether the wedding would still proceed, I continued applying my makeup and donned my bridal gown with steady hands. Then I dispatched a letter to Kevin Sullivan, a man who had always been at odds with David Harper. "The wedding will indeed take place," I told her firmly. When news of David's broken engagement reached the Kelsey estate, I was still at my dressing table. Perhaps I had been abandoned so many times that I felt no particular grief. My father, however, was incandescent with rage. A man who had served at court for decades and risen to the highest ministerial rank, he rarely allowed anger to disturb his composure. "Postponement?" he spat. "What pretty words! When this news spreads throughout the capital, has he given any thought to how you will bear the shame?" He drew a deep breath and glanced at me as if remembering my years of stubborn devotion to David. Finally, he simply waved his hand in resignation. "But what else can be expected? You've cherished him for so many years, determined to marry none but him. What choice do we have but to await his pleasure?" Indeed, I had committed many foolish acts in David Harper's name over the years. When I learned of his passion for ancient texts, I spent enormous sums searching for rare manuscripts, presenting them to him with eager devotion. Yet Princess Vivian shared his literary interests, and when she requested these treasures, he gave them to her without hesitation. I wept in secret for 2 days upon discovering this. When next we met, he merely said, "The princess is royalty. I harbor no improper feelings toward her." And like a fool, I was comforted by his words. David Harper was indeed a gentleman of the highest order, loyal to crown and ceremony. Therefore, though I was his betrothed from childhood, he would always place the princess first. During last year's hunting expedition, Princess Vivian deliberately shot an arrow into my arm, claiming she was aiming at a deer. Enraged and in pain, I fought back. As our struggle reached its climax, David Harper suddenly appeared. The princess smiled slowly and whispered in my ear, "Tell me, when you fight with me, whom will David choose, you or me?" David chose her, just as he had chosen her today. I lay wounded on the ground, watching helplessly as David lifted Princess Vivian onto his horse. He sighed deeply, looking down at me with disapproval. "Rose, you are far too presumptuous." Indeed, I shouldn't have been so presumptuous, but my greatest mistake was loving him at all. Soon the wedding guests learned of the situation. I could hear their conversations drifting through the courtyard. Everyone in the capital knows that Princess Vivian is infatuated with David Harper. Creating such a scene today clearly shows she has no intention of allowing them to marry peacefully. They speak of postponement, but mark my words, this is nothing short of a broken engagement. The third Miss Kelsey was once the envy of all the capital's ladies. Who could have imagined she would face such humiliation? How will she ever find another suitable husband? She has several younger sisters still unwed. I fear their marriage prospects have been damaged as well. David Harper wouldn't concern himself with such matters. He had no idea how utterly humiliated I felt at that moment. I sat in stunned silence, surrounded by red wedding decorations that mocked my situation. David had taken such care with our wedding preparations, personally overseeing every detail, insisting on the finest of everything, from my silk wedding gown to the ceremonial fan, from the pearls embroidered on my shoes to the smallest ornament. He had chosen each item with meticulous attention. He had been so thorough, so caring, right up until the moment he abandoned me. In that instant, I heard my own voice speaking with unexpected clarity. I will not marry him. From this day forward, I would no longer chase after him, weeping and pleading. My words seemed to hang in the air. My father stared at me in shock. Then his face brightened with hope. You've finally seen reason? I nodded, then dismissed the servants and spoke privately with my father. Can you help me send a letter? After hearing my plan, he studied me with concern. Are you certain of this decision? I am, I replied with conviction. Only after my father departed did my personal maid enter from outside. She looked at me with pity, tears in her eyes. Miss, shall I help you remove your jewelry and wedding attire? Since there would be no wedding, it seemed logical to change, but I shook my head. Continue with my preparations. She looked confused. But will the wedding still take place? I nodded firmly. Of course it would proceed. The Kelsey family's century-old reputation could not be destroyed by my actions. I had already humiliated myself enough by chasing after David Harper like a lovesick fool for all these years. To be truthful, I wasn't entirely confident about the letter I had sent. Kevin Sullivan was known for his unpredictable temperament and arrogant nature. He seemed to regard no one with respect. Yet surveying all of the capital's eligible men, he was the first who came to mind. The Harper family wielded considerable influence. Perhaps only Kevin Sullivan would dare to marry me at such a moment. I clenched my damp palms nervously. All I could do was wait. I had authorized my father to promise Kevin substantial rewards for his assistance. I could only hope such incentives would persuade him. If this plan failed, I would devise another solution. But one way or another, this wedding would take place today. Just then, someone came running urgently across the courtyard, the same guard who had delivered David Harper's earlier message. He stood beneath my window and spoke carefully. Miss Kelsey, the princess has awakened. My master instructed me to bring you word. I was puzzled. Upon learning of the princess's accident, David had casually sent me a brief message before abandoning our wedding ceremony to rush to the princess's residence. Now that the princess had recovered and his mind was at ease, he suddenly remembered my existence. I looked up. Why doesn't he come himself? The princess's injuries are severe. If my master is not by her side, she refuses to allow the physicians to treat her. He simply cannot leave. What message does he wish to convey? He says he truly desires to marry you, but circumstances have forced his hand. He asks that you wait for him. Strangely, I found I lacked even the energy to resent him. I understand. The guard bowed quickly and departed. Simultaneously, the steward from the Sullivan estate entered my courtyard, presenting me with a letter containing a single character written in bold, sweeping strokes. Acceptable. The steward smiled and bowed deeply. His lordship says he requires none of the rewards you offered. I looked up in surprise. Then what does he want? The steward smiled mysteriously, but didn't answer directly. You may prepare for your wedding with peace of mind. The Sullivan residence is already being decorated, and we shall not miss the auspicious hour. The wedding guests remained, unaware that the groom had changed. They assumed David Harper had simply reconsidered. When Kevin Sullivan appeared at the gate mounted on a magnificent white stallion, everyone was thoroughly shocked. I heard his voice, cold as struck jade, ringing through the crowd. From beginning to end, the man betrothed to the Kelsey family has been Kevin Sullivan. Does anyone object? Naturally, no one dared. Indeed, the guests spontaneously cleared a path, not daring to gossip in Kevin Sullivan's presence. And so I entered the bridal sedan chair. April 23rd was an auspicious date specifically chosen by David Harper after consulting the royal astronomers. I had believed I would marry him on this day. Fate, however, had other plans. Though we had been engaged since childhood, we were not destined to grow old together. David, I was marrying someone else. Ancient wisdom speaks of marriages made in heaven. On this day, I knelt in the Sullivan family shrine beside a man I had met only briefly, exchanging vows before heaven and earth. When the ceremony concluded, I heard congratulations filling the air. Kevin took my hand and led me across the threshold into the bridal chamber. When he lifted my red veil, I saw an extraordinarily handsome face. He gazed at me intently, then suddenly smiled, quite unlike the fearsome reputation that preceded him. In this candlelit chamber, with the new bride in red silk reflecting the warm light, he said, "Miss Rose Kelsey, it has been quite some time." Before this day, Kevin Sullivan and I had met only twice. The first occasion was when his parents died in the northern frontier and he traveled 1,000 miles escorting their remains home. Standing on a tea house balcony looking down, I accidentally met his gaze. The young man's eyes were shockingly cold. The second meeting was 6 months ago during the Lantern Festival. I was strolling through the streets with David Harper when the crowds grew overwhelming. Princess Vivian called to David from afar, commanding him to purchase hairpins for her. Unable to refuse royal orders, he hurried to select jewelry, releasing my hand. He had apparently forgotten that moments earlier I had pointed to a particular lantern, asking him to win it for me in a game. I stood frozen in place as passers-by jostled me, nearly causing me to fall. Kevin Sullivan steadied me, but before I could react, he had vanished into the crowd. When David Harper returned and witnessed this scene, he frowned disapprovingly. That man has a wild temperament and is difficult to associate with. Should you encounter him in the future, avoid any contact. Only then did I learn that he and Kevin Sullivan had always been at odds. Both were outstanding among the young nobility, one cool and dignified, the other proud and unrestrained. Naturally, they found each other insufferable. I nodded in agreement. I never grew close to people David Harper disliked, fearing it might displease him. Looking up, I watched Kevin Sullivan's figure disappear into the crowd. Now, the Lantern Festival of the past and tonight's red candles seemed to overlay, with two figures merging in my memory. I suddenly looked up, meeting Kevin Sullivan's gaze directly. After speaking those words, his hand brushed against my shoulder as he leaned closer. The distance between us suddenly became intimate, causing my body to tense involuntarily as I closed my eyes. The next moment, I heard soft laughter. Opening my eyes, I saw he held a pillow in his hands. So he hadn't intended to. I felt rather embarrassed. Kevin Sullivan acted as though nothing had occurred, saying simply, "Our marriage was arranged hastily. I understand you're not yet prepared to become a Sullivan family wife. But having married you, I will never renege on this commitment. You may rest assured of that." After a pause, his expression grew somewhat sharper. "David Harper is a fool. He will eventually regret losing you." Unexpectedly, my throat tightened with emotion. I felt like crying. Regret? I wasn't certain. But at that moment, looking at the red-robed young man before me, I suddenly thought that marrying him might not be such a bad thing after all. The next morning when I awoke, Kevin Sullivan was already gone. After completing my morning toilette, I saw him returning from outside. His gaze settled on me briefly before shifting away. The Sullivan residence lacks many feminine necessities. I considered having the steward purchase some items, but I feared you might not like my choices. Would you accompany me shopping? His expression was so serious, as if he were genuinely worried about some monumental concern. I nearly laughed, but simply nodded. Certainly. Kevin Sullivan and I were essentially strangers who happened to be married, making our shared carriage ride quite awkward. Just as I was considering whether to make conversation, our vehicle suddenly stopped. Another carriage was blocking our path. I was about to lift the curtain when I heard an extremely familiar voice. "I have urgent business. Might you allow me to pass first, brother?" My hands clenched involuntarily as I withdrew from the curtain. Kevin Sullivan glanced at me before stepping out of the carriage. He made a dismissive sound, his tone casual. "And if this marquis adamantly refuses?" Seeing that his opponent was Kevin Sullivan, David Harper's tone became equally stiff. "Kevin Sullivan, I truly have urgent matters to attend to. You never bother with court duties and have no wife to consider, so surely you have time to spare. Why must you target me?" Kevin Sullivan smirked. "Who says this marquis has no wife? Sitting in this carriage is my beloved spouse. We're hastening to purchase clothing and jewelry." David Harper raised his eyebrows in surprise. Seeming to recall something, his attitude actually softened. "You're married? When did this wedding take place? I had no knowledge of it whatsoever." I suddenly remembered asking David Harper long ago, how is it that Lord Kevin Sullivan remains unwed? Given his exceptional looks and approaching 20th year, he should have married already. David Harper had glanced at me then, saying, "Him? His standards are impossibly high. He's rejected countless marriage proposals over the years. If he ever does marry, I'll be truly astonished." Returning to the present conversation, I heard Kevin Sullivan respond, "Yesterday." David Harper seemed enlightened, his voice softening slightly. "To be honest, I was supposed to marry yesterday as well, but unexpected circumstances arose. I'm now going to appease my betrothed. She must be furious with me." His betrothed? Apparently, David Harper remained unaware that I had married someone else. Understandable, since he had devoted himself entirely to Princess Vivian and had likely just left the princess's residence. He would learn the truth eventually, but revealing myself publicly now would only create scandal. I remained seated properly in the carriage as Kevin Sullivan's voice reached me, tinged with amusement and mockery. "Oh, then your affairs must indeed take precedence." He instructed our driver to move aside. These two had been antagonistic for years, and Kevin Sullivan possessed such a temperament. This unexpected courtesy left David Harper both surprised and ashamed. Through the curtain, I watched David Harper bow deeply in gratitude. "Thank you." He smiled briefly, then called toward our carriage. "In the future, I shall visit with my betrothed to pay respects to your lady wife." With that, he turned to leave. But someone called after him, "Master Harper! Master Harper!" It was a servant from the princess's residence. "The princess has awakened and is asking for you." David Harper's figure froze, hesitation evident in his posture. Finally, he turned back toward the princess's residence. He had bowed to Kevin Sullivan for my sake and repeatedly called me his betrothed. But that was all. Marrying Kevin Sullivan was the only unexpected turn in my brief 20 years of life. Strangely, this surprise didn't leave me feeling lost. Instead, I sensed hidden anticipation. That night, Kevin had planned to sleep in his study. I stopped him. Under the moonlight, I asked him seriously, "I've just arrived at the Sullivan residence. If you don't share my quarters, the servants might not respect me as their mistress. If they bully or neglect me as a result, could you bear it?" Kevin Sullivan looked slightly stunned, then asked, "You being bullied?" I felt as though he could see right through me. The truth was, I had known since childhood that I would become a Harper family daughter-in-law. I had never slackened in learning household management. The Sullivan servants could hardly intimidate me, Regardless, Kevin Sullivan remained. I had my own motivations. I intended to be Kevin Sullivan's proper wife. If we grew distant now, we would only drift further apart with time. That wasn't what I wanted. As for other matters, I could wait. I was puzzled that on our wedding day, the Sullivan steward had told me Kevin wanted none of my promised rewards, yet hadn't revealed what he actually desired. Had he agreed to marry me merely to spite David Harper, or did he genuinely wish to marry me? But we had barely met. While I pondered these questions, I heard rustling sounds from the inner chamber. Kevin Sullivan was bathing. Soon after came the sound of water. My face gradually reddened, and I found myself unable to listen further. I left the room, allowing the evening breeze to cool my burning cheeks. Estimating sufficient time had passed, I prepared to return when I heard maids talking in the corridor. Our mistress is truly beautiful. We waited so long and finally have a lady of the house. Indeed! His lordship deserves such a fine young woman. The Harper family lacked discernment. Speaking of which, when I left the estate this evening, I heard the princess had fallen gravely ill. That gentleman has already departed the capital, traveling 1,000 miles to Azure Dragon Mountain seeking medicine. 1,000-mile journey, even riding hard, the round trip would require at least 3 days. If I truly hadn't married into the Sullivan family and was still waiting for him, how agonizing would those 3 days have been? David, how could you assume I would definitely wait for you? Kevin Sullivan obtained an imperial marriage edict for us. I had no idea when he had arranged this, and even after receiving the decree, I remained stunned for quite some time. Since the dynasty's founding, the emperor rarely granted marriage edicts. I understood how difficult such a decree would be to obtain. Standing in the corridor, I watched Kevin Sullivan ahead of me. Dressed in white robes, he moved with natural grace through the flowering trees. I called after him, "Lord Kevin Sullivan." He paused and turned. "Yes?" I asked, "Why did you agree to marry me? Because of your conflict with David Harper? But we were complete strangers," Kevin Sullivan said quietly, a slight frown crossing his brow. After a long moment, he smiled suddenly, studying me intently with a casual air. "Rose, where were you in the 3rd month of spring 5 years ago?" I froze, my grip loosening until the imperial decree fluttered to the ground with a soft thud. That afternoon, Kevin Sullivan and I entered the palace together to express our gratitude. The emperor had always doted on his nephew Kevin Sullivan, worrying about his solitary life and constantly fretting over his marriage prospects. Upon meeting me, he asked several additional questions, all of which I answered appropriately. Finally, the emperor looked at me and sighed. "Vincent Kelsey excels at raising daughters." I was slightly startled. The emperor smiled. "I'm not entirely ignorant of your circumstances. You and the Harper family were destined to have affinity without fate, but you and my nephew are perfectly matched." His expression held deeper meaning. I didn't dare speculate further and simply acknowledged his words. Leaving the imperial study, we walked toward the palace gates when someone suddenly called out. I turned to see Princess Vivian. She glanced between Kevin Sullivan and me, pressing her lips together. After a long while, she spoke. "Cousin Kevin, may I speak privately with cousin-in-law?" I had long heard that the princess was willful and lawless, yet somehow intimidated by Kevin Sullivan alone. Now I witnessed this firsthand. Kevin Sullivan didn't immediately agree but looked at me first. Seeing my nod, he responded, "Very well." Once Kevin Sullivan was out of earshot, Princess Vivian seemed to relax. "So the rumors are true. You actually married him?" I smiled. "Indeed. Lord Kevin Sullivan is incomparably handsome. Marrying him is no loss." The princess made a dismissive sound, showing no signs of serious illness. It seemed that from the very beginning she had been deceiving David Harper. Her manipulation yesterday was likely based on information she had heard from the Emperor as she waited for this marriage edict. The princess withdrew a letter from her sleeve bearing David Harper's handwriting. "Look at this. Despite traveling day and night, he still finds time to write to me. From your wedding day until now, have you received so much as a single word from him?" Looking at the letter, I felt an unexpected pang of bitterness. Originally, I hadn't considered this possibility, but Vivian's behavior now convinced me that David Harper had indeed sent me letters, which she had intercepted. I took a deep breath. That no longer matters. If the princess desires him, feel free to make him marry you. It has nothing to do with me. The princess raised an eyebrow. Those are words I never expected to hear from you. I offered no comment. She sighed. Honestly, without David Harper between us, I would greatly admire a woman like you. But since I love him, certain actions became unavoidable. So she had competed with me for all these years, and I had never once emerged victorious. I had no intention of continuing this conversation and turned to leave. The princess's voice followed me. That day at the hunting grounds, I asked whether you thought he would choose me or you. Actually, I wasn't certain then either, because I could see he had feelings for you. But he had received great kindness from our imperial family in his youth, and given his nature, he would always remember this debt regardless of circumstances. That day, he chose me. I knew then that he could never escape my influence for the rest of his life. When David Harper was still young, the Harper family had experienced a great catastrophe with the entire household imprisoned. It was the then crown prince who vindicated them. Because of this, whether in his official duties or matters concerning the princess, David Harper always maintained proper ministerial conduct. He respected the imperial family and protected the princess. I, his betrothed, was consistently relegated to secondary importance. Everyone said he loved me. Yet, why had I suffered so many grievances because of him? 2 days later, Kevin Sullivan accompanied me for the traditional return visit to my natal family. He was unusually formal, trying on several different outfits. Watching him, I couldn't help but laugh. "You're only meeting my father. We've encountered each other before, so why are you nervous?" Kevin Sullivan paused in adjusting his robes and looked at me. "How do you know I wasn't nervous before?" I was rendered speechless, but something seemed to explode in my mind. 5 years ago, I had visited my maternal grandmother's family in Yuzhou. There, I had given Kevin Sullivan a sword originally intended for David Harper. Though he aspired to scholarly pursuits, he had never neglected martial training. I had watched him practice sword work, truly magnificent and powerful as a startled swan or fierce tiger. But immediately after having the sword forged, I received a letter from friends in the capital. Princess Vivian had drunk too much at a palace banquet and declared publicly, "I love David Harper and will marry no one but him in this life." David Harper had been seated below and hadn't contradicted the princess publicly. Instead, he had arranged for her care, acting most considerately. My friend wrote indignantly, "David Harper's behavior shows no regard for you as his betrothed. Only someone as obstinate as you would insist on having no one but him." I had been both anxious and angry, taking the newly forged sword with the intention of discarding it. But outside, I discovered Kevin Sullivan collapsed unconscious on the ground. The northern frontier was near Yuzhou, and he had pursued traitors from his military unit all the way there. Caught off guard, he had been severely wounded and his sword broken. I secretly hid him away, found someone to treat his injuries, and gave him the sword originally meant for David Harper. The young man looked up at me and asked, "How shall I repay you?" I thought for a long while before smiling. "Remember my name, Rose. If we meet again by fate and I need your help, you must certainly assist me." The young man gripped his hand tightly, his face streaked with blood and dirt. He softly agreed, "Yes." I spoke carelessly without truly intending to ask his help, and I never learned his name before departing. When my father met Kevin Sullivan, he was initially quite courteous. After dinner, the two men retired to the study together. Half an hour later, they emerged completely transformed. My father kept patting Kevin Sullivan's shoulder. "Marrying Rose to you gives me great peace of mind." Before our departure, he whispered to me privately, "Lord Kevin has profound depths and treats you with sincerity. This may prove a blessing in disguise. Keep an open mind." I smiled wryly, realizing he still believed I harbored feelings for David Harper. Yes. Outside the Kelsey family gates, Kevin Sullivan mounted the carriage first, then extended his hand toward me with a smile. At this moment, his features were refined and his bearing peerless. Nothing like his desperate appearance 5 years earlier. No wonder I hadn't recognized him initially. I smiled and placed my hand in his. He gripped it firmly. But the next moment, someone approached on horseback. "What are you doing?" I turned to see David Harper staring fixedly at us. He appeared travel-worn and exhausted, with trembling hands gripping his reins. Kevin Sullivan's expression turned cold as he regarded David Harper with interest. "What this Marquis does is hardly your concern." David Harper dismounted and approached. He pulled me behind him, positioning himself protectively between Kevin Sullivan and me. He gently coaxed, "Don't be afraid. I'm here." He apparently believed Kevin Sullivan was threatening me. After speaking, he questioned Kevin Sullivan with utmost severity. "Rose has been my betrothed since childhood, and you are already married. To behave improperly toward my betrothed here at the Kelsey family gates is highly inappropriate. Lord Kevin Sullivan owes me an explanation." I stared at David Harper's back, momentarily dazed. For so many years, whenever I had conflicts with Princess Vivian, he always stood before her, lecturing me about my misconduct. He had never taken my side before. Kevin Sullivan frowned slightly, his gaze becoming dangerous. "David Harper, you demand an explanation from me? Then what about you? On your wedding day, you publicly broke your engagement and repeatedly defended the princess. Have you considered offering the woman behind you any explanation?" David Harper froze, turning to look at me. In his urgency, he actually gripped my shoulders. "Rose, I was coming to find you. I've simply been entangled in various matters these past days." Before he could finish, Kevin Sullivan pulled him away forcefully. "David Harper, for you to touch this Marquise's wife so freely, shouldn't you provide me with an explanation?" David Harper stared in disbelief. "What did you say? Your wife? You jest. She has been betrothed to me since childhood and has always prioritized my interests above all else. How could she be your wife?" He then asked me desperately, "Rose, tell him quickly. Tell him to give up hope." His eyes were somewhat reddened and bloodshot. He gazed at me unblinkingly, his lips pressed tight, with unspeakable anguish reflected in his eyes. But the denial he expected never came. I simply reached out and deliberately took Kevin Sullivan's hand. Meeting David's gaze directly, I smiled at him. "I have married Kevin. I am indeed his wife." Therefore, Kevin could hold my hand. David Harper opened his mouth but seemed unable to produce sound for a long moment. He grew unsteady, staggering backward 2 steps and nearly collapsing. He mumbled incoherently, the veins on his wrists protruding. "That day, on our wedding day, you married him. Rose, how could you? How dare you?" I nodded. "Yes. If you had truly cared for me, you would have known of this matter long ago." Had he bothered to inquire about my welfare even once, he wouldn't be discovering my marriage to another only now. But he hadn't. He had remained day and night at the princess's side, worrying for her, gathering medicine for her, completely devoted. At that time. David Harper's head began to throb. What had he been doing then? He had focused entirely on helping the seriously injured princess recover. He thought this would be the last time. He had done enough for the princess, whether from duty or gratitude. After his marriage, he would no longer concern himself with her affairs. As for me, as for Rose, I loved him so much. I would surely wait for him. I paid David Harper no further attention, pulling Kevin Sullivan toward our carriage, but David Harper suddenly snapped back to awareness, speaking urgently and somewhat incoherently. "What if you are married? Divorce is still possible. I'll petition your father. He will agree." I had never seen him in such a state. I frowned. "David Harper, what are you thinking? I am very well now and have no thoughts of divorce." After speaking, the man beside me lightly scratched my palm with his finger. It tickled terribly. Kevin Sullivan spoke with a mischievous, somewhat smug tone. "You probably don't know yet. Rose and I received an imperial marriage edict. How could such a union be dissolved?" The light in David Harper's eyes instantly extinguished. He trembled, his body barely able to remain upright. Logically, he should have returned no earlier than tomorrow. Clearly, he had traveled without rest, day and night, hoping to return sooner, ever sooner, but ultimately, he was too late. I entered the carriage. As our vehicle departed, wind stirred the curtains. I saw David Harper collapse directly to the ground. Princess Vivian must have been waiting nearby all along. Seeing this scene, she rushed over to support him. "David Harper!" I withdrew my gaze to find Kevin Sullivan watching me with perfect composure. He asked, "Madam, how long do you intend to hold my hand?" Caught off guard, I blushed furiously and finally said through gritted teeth, "I shall hold it as long as I please." After my words fell, I heard the man's gentle, indulgent voice. "Very well," he said. I learned that David Harper had fallen ill. He suffered continuous high fever, and every physician in the Imperial Medical Bureau was summoned to the Harper residence in rotation. Princess Vivian was furious, remaining at his bedside for days. When David Harper finally awakened, they quarreled bitterly. No matter how slow to understand, David Harper must have realized by then that the princess had been deceiving him from the beginning. When news reached the emperor, he quickly confined the princess to her quarters. But everyone in the palace knew of the princess's special favor, so this confinement was merely to spare her further heartbreak over David Harper. David Harper, still weakened by illness, came to the Sullivan residence. Standing at our gates in thin clothing with a pale complexion, he said, "I want to see Rose." He seemed capable of saying only this one phrase repeatedly. Kevin Sullivan was away from the estate and the steward approached me in distress. "Madam, Master Harper insists on seeing you. A crowd of common people has already gathered outside to watch." I rose and looked toward the horizon. Dark clouds gathered. Rain was approaching. I took an umbrella and walked outside. We would have to meet eventually. When I saw David Harper, sweat beaded his forehead, though his back remained rigidly straight. Curious onlookers surrounded him, whispering among themselves about why the once glorious Harper family's young master stood so wretchedly before the Sullivan residence gates. Rumors about our wedding day had inevitably spread. Didn't Master Harper break the engagement first? Why does he now seem reluctant to part with the Marchioness, insisting on seeing her? What else could it be? When the young lady was beside him, he felt indifferent. She seemed dispensable. But once she married another, he suddenly remembered all her good qualities. If you ask me, Lord Kevin Sullivan truly showed deep devotion. If he hadn't married the Marchioness, then she would have been destroyed by gossip long ago. These words reached David Harper's ears, and he looked up at me with stubborn intensity. It's not like that. He wanted to say he hadn't been indifferent to me, hadn't intended to abandon me. I approached David Harper and sighed. I remember you mastering the 1,000-character classic at age 3 and at 12 debating court scholars until you exasperated the old chancellor, who then praised your great talent. Is that correct? David Harper nodded hesitantly. These facts were well known, especially since I had memorized every detail about David Harper during my years of infatuation. He knew this, but couldn't understand why I was asking, I continued. Then tell me, with all your intelligence, why have you repeatedly placed me in untenable positions? Setting aside today's wedding crisis, consider today alone. I was Kevin Sullivan's newly-wed bride, while he was my former betrothed of more than 10 years. Appearing before the Sullivan gates in such a state, demanding to see me under public scrutiny, within hours, if not sooner, scandalous rumors about us would spread throughout the capital. He was undeniably brilliant. Why had he never considered my situation? David Harper stood stunned, his lips dry. I apologize. I simply wanted to see you and speak with you. I didn't consider these implications. I was thoughtless, too impulsive. I turned away, nearly moved to tears. He valued reputation above all else, and surely the public criticism had pained him. Yet whom could he blame? As we spoke, rain began falling softly. I opened my umbrella as my attending maid approached quickly. Mistress, allow me to take over. I shook my head. Return inside. David Harper watched from across the way as rain soaked his clothing and sleeves, leaving him looking utterly lost. He murmured, Mistress, mistress. If we had married successfully that day, you would be my wife. I replied, marriage was never a game to me. Besides being Rose, I am also a Kelsey family daughter. Further discussion serves no purpose. Please leave. David Harper refused but didn't know what else to say. He insisted through gritted teeth. But surely Kevin Sullivan isn't suitable either. You've known each other mere days, yet you would entrust your entire life to him? I arrived only days late. We've known each other more than 10 years. Why would you trust him but not me? I nodded. Yes, because I have trusted you far too many times. That year at the hunting grounds, before taking Vivian away, you clearly promised to return for me. But I waited and waited until my arm was soaked with blood, and still you didn't come. Later, I learned that Vivian was pleading with the Emperor for a marriage edict at that very moment. David Harper instinctively protested, but I didn't agree. No, so when the princess was moved to tears, you went to comfort her. David Harper fell silent. I smiled. That winter, when I injured my leg and couldn't leave the estate, I wrote asking if you might visit me. You agreed, but the moment you entered Kelsey Gates, the princess's servants arrived saying Vivian wanted you to accompany her snow viewing at the lake pavilion. I thought then how beautiful it must be for Vivian, snow falling everywhere with her beloved beside her. Last winter, when she and I both wanted the same dress and neither would yield, you witnessed this from outside the shop. You told me to defer to the princess, saying you would buy me hundreds or thousands of such dresses in the future, but the one dress I most desired had already been taken. Such incidents were countless, too many to enumerate. Finally, I pressed my lips together and spoke earnestly. Go home. Marry the princess. Court other noble daughters, anything you wish. But please, stop seeking me out. After I revealed this to Kevin Sullivan upon his return, he merely raised an eyebrow. That's all? I hesitated. Yes. He stood in the corridor. Your feelings matter most. That day when he collapsed at the Kelsey Gates, you didn't look back even once. I knew then that you had let him go. Since that's the case, why should I be displeased? I smiled and looked up at him. Truly? But you weren't supposed to return until tomorrow. Why did you hurry back in such haste? Kevin Sullivan's body stiffened and he remained silent for quite some time before awkwardly changing the subject. This year's spring is very beautiful. Shall we go for an outing soon? I met his gaze. Wonderful. Kevin Sullivan kept his word about the outing. The very next morning he began making preparations. We departed together for the willow-lined riverbank, and before approaching closely, we heard sounds of laughter and merriment. Reflecting on the past, I had countless times suggested such outings with David Harper. He always agreed, then looked at me with gentle amusement, saying my playful nature was rather excessive. I paid no attention to such remarks. I used to think David Harper was simply too busy. Finding a day when the weather was perfect and he had no pressing affairs proved nearly impossible. I would plan and plan, only to be disappointed repeatedly. Princess Vivian would never give me such opportunities, but now everything felt perfect. I suddenly remembered that year when I fainted in the forest as evening approached. With no one around and my father absent from the area, no one thought to look for me. Finally, a black-robed youth carried me to safety. Mindful of proper boundaries between men and women, he barely dared touch me. After bandaging my wounds and secretly bringing me back, he brazenly shot an arrow into the training grounds that landed near the princess's feet. With the wind whistling around him, he spoke lazily. "Stop crying. If you cry again, I'll shoot you dead." That marked the beginning of his fearsome reputation, and when I awakened, I only knew my rescuer had calloused palms. I only knew the capital had acquired someone as violent as Lord Sullivan, someone who dared threaten a princess with death and showed no respect for David Harper. Not until days ago when he took my hand did I connect these two incidents. It had all been for my sake. 2 days later, news emerged from the palace. Princess Vivian had begun a hunger strike, swearing she would die rather than marry anyone but David Harper. But David Harper refused. This matter so vexed the emperor that he finally summoned David Harper for a lengthy private audience. That very evening, the emperor arranged the princess's marriage, not to David Harper, but to another noble young man who had always been friendly with her. The emperor's anger made his attitude inflexible, and this time the princess didn't protest, meekly accepting the imperial decree. David Harper, however, actually requested assignment to a distant post. Here was a Harper family son with unlimited prospects, in the prime of life, yet choosing to leave the capital at such a crucial moment. When this news spread, no one in the capital could believe it. I heard that the Harper family elders worked through the night trying to dissuade him, but David Harper remained adamant. No amount of persuasion could change his mind. 2 days later, while shopping for jewelry, I encountered an unexpected person, Princess Vivian. Dressed simply without makeup, she pulled me to a secluded spot, her face streaked with tears. "Please, please persuade David Harper. I won't marry him. Tell him not to leave. Official career is no trifle. I only love him. I don't want to destroy him. If you speak to him, he will certainly listen to you." Looking at Princess Vivian, I shook my head. "This is a matter between you two. David Harper and I have long since ended our connection. By what right or standing could I advise him? Moreover, he may have his own considerations. How do you know his decision necessarily concerns you or me?" The princess stared blankly without speaking. I freed my hand from her grip and moved to leave. She called after me loudly, "Rose, he did write letters to you. Don't you want to know what they said?" I took a deep breath without answering her. Those letters would have been important to me then, but I no longer wished to see them now. 2 days after that, the palace held a banquet. I attended with Kevin Sullivan. The princess was in her pre-wedding seclusion and didn't appear. During the feast, I saw David Harper across from me. Though he normally abstained from alcohol entirely, he now drank cup after cup. I glanced briefly, then looked away. Midway through the banquet, Kevin Sullivan was summoned by the Emperor. My side suddenly felt empty. After listlessly eating some pastries, a palace maid approached. "Madam, his lordship awaits you at Jade Flower Hall to leave the palace together." I recalled Kevin Sullivan mentioning before his departure that he intended to visit the noble consort at Jade Flower Hall. I nodded. Very well. Leaving the banquet, I carried a lantern toward Jade Flower Hall. Entering the corridor, a sudden gust extinguished the flame. Startled, I called out, "Who's there?" The person didn't respond. I could only hear heavy footsteps and the soft sigh as he lifted his sleeve to touch my forehead. I pressed my lips together. "David Harper?" He answered, "Yes, I simply wanted to see you once more before leaving." Then why extinguish the lantern? Before this, I would never have imagined David Harper capable of such behavior. The Harper family's sons had always been upright and honorable. David Harper's voice trembled. If I hadn't, I couldn't have spoken certain words. I remained silent. He continued. "These past days, I've realized I was utterly wrong all along. I believed my feelings were genuine and that even without words you would understand." I nearly laughed bitterly. How could I understand if he never spoke? Moreover, even judging by actions rather than words, his behavior hadn't demonstrated genuine feeling. He laughed self-mockingly. "My departure this time isn't because of you. It's at His Majesty's special request for important duties." I nodded in understanding. "Are you finished?" David Harper's throat worked convulsively before he finally nodded. Yes. We both fell silent for a long time, a rare, peaceful moment between us. In the past, I had always tried to engage him in longer conversations since he spoke so little. He never found me tiresome and was always patient. Now that I remained quiet, he seemed uncertain how to speak. The moon hung faintly in the sky and human figures stood voiceless in the shadows. I heard David Harper's departing footsteps across the stone pavement, slow and measured. Shortly after, a palace maid hurried over with a lantern. Seeing me, she said, "Madam, Miss Harper learned you were here and specially sent this." I accepted it with thanks. Indeed, I had always been friendly with the Harper family daughters. Since childhood, knowing I would eventually marry David Harper, I had familiarized myself with everyone's preferences and worked diligently to win their favor. If I had truly married David Harper, the Harper daughters would be calling me sister-in-law by now. I continued walking to the end of the corridor, where I found Kevin Sullivan waiting. He wore richly embroidered robes of deep crimson that burned like cold fire, dazzling to behold. The sight momentarily blinded me. He raised an eyebrow and spoke in a clear, cold voice. "Miss Rose Kelsey, are you lost?" I nodded and smiled. "Indeed I am." He walked toward me, extending his hand. "Then come home with me." I looked at his hand with its slight calluses, just like the young man who had rescued me 5 years ago. Moonlight fell like water across his face, which had matured considerably since then but remained the same person who had once said yes to me. I placed my hand in his palm. Yes. This time, we walked hand in hand through the long palace corridors. Behind us were David Harper's departing footsteps. Ahead was Kevin Sullivan's warm palm. I no longer looked back but followed his steps toward our shared future. All the tears I had shed for David Harper, all the foolish things I had done for him, all the grievances I had suffered because of him, everything scattered with tonight's wind. I finally understood that some people are destined to be mere passers-by in one's life, while others are meant to accompany you through its entirety. Kevin Sullivan was right. David Harper would eventually regret losing me. but that no longer mattered. What mattered was that I had found someone who truly cherished me. Under the gentle moonlight and soft spring breeze, I followed Kevin Sullivan out of the palace gates toward our home. There lay our future, our happiness, and my resolution never to shed tears for anyone else again. That's the story for today. Hope you enjoyed this incredible tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe for more captivating stories like this, and don't forget to like and share this video. Thank you for being here. See you next time.